Welcome to RJI's podcast series hosted by RJI President Lisa Rea. Restorative Justice International is an association and network of over 6,000 members and affiliates. In this podcast series, Lisa interviews leaders from around the world who support restorative justice, including crime victims, ex-offenders, exonerees, and human rights experts. In these podcasts, you will hear from key thought leaders who support systemic justice reform based on restorative justice principles. Now here's Lisa Rea.
Today's podcast is with San Francisco District Attorney Chesa Boudin. RJI endorsed Chesa in 2019 for District Attorney, and we've done a couple of podcasts with him since. But today, Jeffrey Deskovic and I are co-moderating this podcast. Jeff sits on our RJI's Global Advisory Council. On June 7th, Chesa is facing a recall election in San Francisco County. We'll split up our time today talking about criminal justice reform based on restorative justice and Chesa's commitment to justice reform in general, including his commitment to addressing wrongful convictions. Welcome, Chesa.
Welcome. Thank you so much for welcoming me. It's great to be here. Good to see both of you again. And as always, inspired and appreciative of the work that you both do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And the first question is kind of an obvious one that I think you've been asked in the last few months is, why should you remain in office? In essence, what promises have you fulfilled since you were elected, and what challenges have you faced?
Well, I certainly want to answer the question. I also want to flip the script a little bit and say I should stay in office because I was elected to a 4-year term by the majority of San Franciscans. And I've been governing for about 27 months during historically challenging circumstances. Global pandemic has meant that of the 27 months I've been in office, I've only been able to come into the office physically for about 3 months. We're facing really historic challenges. And despite that, I'm proud of the work we've done and what we've accomplished. So let me share a few of the things that we did following through on our commitments to voters back in 2019 when I ran for office. One of the things I know particularly relevant to Jeff and his work is we created an independent innocence commission. We built in many ways, a model organization outside of our office that makes recommendations directly to me about cases where someone may have been wrongfully convicted. And luckily in San Francisco, we're not dealing with a huge number of people in prison. It's a relatively small universe. And of course, obviously we want this Innocence Commission to work faster, better, harder, but it is a model in the way we set it up because it's independent from the office, because it has representatives from key stakeholders like the Northern California Innocence Project, like the public defender, a retired judge. The other thing we did, Lisa, that I know is going to be something that resonates with our listeners here today, is we've expanded our restorative justice programs, not only for juvenile offenders, but we also secured a $6 million grant exclusively to grow a restorative justice practice, including young adults, transitional age youth, and the like. We really see restorative justice as a victims' rights issue, and we want to make it available for all those victims who prefer it to traditional prosecution. And we're just now getting on board with that grant. We've got staff in our office hired, and we are also now giving several $1 million away to community-based partners who are going to be overseeing the restorative justice processes. Let me give you a couple other highlights of what we've done. We managed to reduce the number of kids in juvenile detention by nearly 70%. We also have stood up for small businesses. Just this week, we filed the groundbreaking lawsuit against a law firm that was unscrupulously targeting thousands of small businesses across California with fraudulent claims. We're being proactive about getting guns off the street. That's why my office filed a lawsuit against 3 separate gun manufacturers that are making illegal ghost guns and shipping them all across the state of California and beyond. On top of that, we created a worker protection unit that has gone after some gig economy companies for systematically stealing wages and benefits from their employees. And in the meantime, we've also continued doing the traditional work of prosecutors. We're filing new criminal cases at a higher rate than my predecessor. And we've dramatically expanded diversion programs so that when people are charged with a crime, we're connecting them with services and supervision, giving them incentives to engage with programming. And if they do, we're not seeking a criminal conviction at the end of the case in the less serious cases. Let me stop there, but there's lots more we could talk about.
Yeah, and it's kind of a loaded question. The next just follow-up point to that question is a big one too, and then we have a lot of questions to ask you in addition. But when we're hearing about the recall, Jeff's in New York, I'm not in California, but I follow California closely. So the recall, who's behind it? Can you like briefly describe who's behind the recall to replace you?
Absolutely. The recall was started by a failed Republican mayoral candidate initially. He didn't get enough signatures, and other people took over for him and started their own effort to gather signatures, piggybacking on him. The recall has been officially endorsed by the San Francisco Republican Party, and it's being funded by a number of Republican billionaires, including a guy named William Oberndorf, who's given Mitch McConnell more than $3 million. He's a Republican, and we know what his values are. We know what he bankrolled Mitch McConnell to do. Things like undermine gun control, attack women's right to control their own bodies, go after immigrant communities, things that promote the death penalty, things that are anathema to San Francisco values and to public safety, frankly. On the other side of the equation, the no on recall has been endorsed by the San Francisco Democratic Party, by the San Francisco Labor Council, by the nurses, by the teachers, by the city college professors. It's been opposed by a majority of the Board of Supervisors here, and also the ACLU, the Sierra Club, and even singer John Legend. So we have a strong, broad coalition of Democratic leaders who are saying reject the recall, vote no on Proposition H in June. And on the other side, they've got essentially the Republican billionaires and the Republican Party.
Okay, thank you. And now, Jeff, you want to go ahead with the next question?
But yeah, actually, yes, I do. So, Chesa, since you mentioned, wrongful conviction in your opening answer, my question here is, how many people have been exonerated? And if none, what is your, why not? And discuss any wrongful conviction prevention legislation that you support.
Well, we created this unit late in my first year in office, and we very quickly identified a case where we believed someone had been in prison for decades for a murder he did not commit. When the commission brought that to me, I reviewed the file and I said, I agree with the commission's recommendation. I believe he was wrongfully convicted, and we need to immediately ask the court to have him released. There were some complications related to immigration status and his particular location, which facility he was in custody in, that slowed us down a little bit. But the bigger problem was that, much to my shock, even after we went to court and said to the judge, we believe this man was wrongfully convicted, we as the prosecutors, as representatives of the people doing justice, are asking that he be released, the judge refused. And that's not something that we've seen in many cases in other jurisdictions. Usually, if the district attorney says, we don't think this person is guilty, judges defer. Here, we've spent more than a year since we first went to the court, litigating, arguing, filing briefs, trying to explain to the judge. Now another judge is involved, holding hearings with witnesses. The good news is that we expect a ruling, and I'm cautiously optimistic that it will be a ruling consistent with the facts and with justice within the next couple of weeks. And so I hope that at long last, this man who went to prison as a very young man and has been there for decades will finally be released because he did not commit the murder he was convicted of. The Innocence Commission has only presented me with a couple of cases, and I think the process was really slowed down by the unexpected resistance we faced from the judge. I think we need courts to be more open to accepting that people may have been wrongly convicted, and that we have a duty as we do justice to remedy wrongs in the past, not only look forward in our approach to justice. So I hope that judges will be more open and take more seriously the horrific injustice being committed when someone who is wrongfully convicted is held in prison, as this man has been now for more than a year since we made the decision that he should be released. Tremendously frustrating. I think there could be a role for legislation as well which you mentioned, Jeff, because sometimes it takes legislation, giving judges clear guidelines, giving district attorneys clear pathways, and creating remedies for people who have been wrongfully convicted. We know that across the country, people are wrongfully convicted for lots of different reasons: mistaken identity, police misconduct, prosecutor misconduct, judicial error, jury misconduct. And whatever the reason, this is not about trying to go after some individual. This is about trying to do justice and make sure we don't have innocent people languishing behind bars.
I believe that there is a bill that's been introduced which would allow people who've been convicted based on junk science to have a remedy if they can get another trial. Do you support that bill?
Well, I don't have the text in front of me, so I can't speak on the bill itself. I know these are always complicated and the devil's in the details. What I can certainly say is I absolutely recognize the devastating role that junk science has played in securing convictions. You hear about cases where people are using bite mark evidence or false forms of DNA evidence. And this is not a one-off kind of situation. This is really defined crime lab work for decades all across the country. And sometimes it's not junk science, but it's other behavior that's morally or legally reprehensible. I'm going to give you one example where we had a situation here in San Francisco recently where we learned that the police department was storing the DNA profile of every single survivor of sexual assault, of every single victim who they gathered DNA from. And without consent, without permission, they were building a database. And they used that database for investigating crimes totally unrelated to the reason the victim had come forward and asked for help. Now, just as it is wrong to use junk science, it's wrong to illegally use DNA for purposes it wasn't provided for. And we have a lot of work to do in San Francisco and beyond to ensure that the science we are presenting to our jurors is robust, rigorous, peer-reviewed, and that the evidence we're gathering, whether from victims or from suspects, is gathered in ways that complies with the law.
Jeff, I'm going to jump in here and kind of turn the conversation. So this is something that I know you've been dealing with quite a bit over the last 2 years, but you've taken a lot of criticism for crime rates in San Francisco during the COVID pandemic. So do you think that's fair?
Well, let me answer with three separate parts. I mean, the first one is if people are in fear, if people in San Francisco don't feel safe, then I've got work to do. And I'm committed to making sure everybody in San Francisco is safe and also feels safe. The second point is that no district attorney, certainly not in the short term, has the ability through their policies or practices to single-handedly bend the arc of crime rates. It's just not real. If it were, then somewhere in the country, some newly elected district attorney would have managed to totally eradicate crime. It's not how it works. That being said, when I look at the data, when we look at the actual numbers, I've got a chart in front of me. And what it shows is that in San Francisco, in the 27 months I've been in office, if you compare the number of reported crimes in that time period with the exact same time period, 27 months before I was in office, there are 25,991 fewer reported crimes in San Francisco. In other words, there's been a reduction of nearly 20% in overall reported crime since I took office. Now, I'm not taking credit for that for the same reason I said in the beginning. Individual district attorneys cannot single-handedly bend the arc of crime trends, certainly not when up against a global pandemic, massive changes in employment and access to services. But when people say crime is out of control in San Francisco, the reality is, if you look at the numbers, it has fallen by 20% in the period I've been in office compared with the identical period previously. Doesn't mean we don't have work to do. Doesn't mean there aren't real victims of real crimes and that we don't need to continue to find ways to support those victims and to uplift them and help them heal and to do justice and hold people accountable. We do. But we need to have an honest conversation about what the data shows and about how San Francisco compares to cities like Oakland or Sacramento with traditional tough on crime, convict at all cost prosecutors who have failed not only to do justice, not only to avoid wrongful convictions, not only to empower victims and support them, but also have failed to keep their communities safe.
Hey, Jeff, and You have
Yes,
a question?
building off of your last answer, many people blame California Proposition 57, which was passed in 2016, which allows for the early release of certain offenders based on credits earned for the increase in crime in the state of California. My question is, do you think that that's fair, and does that apply to San Francisco?
It's not fair for a couple of reasons. Look, property crime is a real problem in San Francisco and across California. And without diving into the various reasons for it and the roles that wealth inequality and other sorts of policies, access to jobs and housing, the role of big internet companies in creating marketplaces for reselling stolen goods and making it easier to fence stolen goods. There's a lot of misinformation about Prop 47. So the first thing that's important for people to remember is that in the context of my recall or election, Prop 47 predates me by several years. Second of all, Prop 47 does not decriminalize anything. It simply changes the threshold for when a theft goes from a misdemeanor to a felony. And it did it in ways that failed to even keep up with inflation since the last time that adjustment was made. In other words, in California, for a theft to be a felony, it has to be a theft valued at $950 or more. Now, a lot of folks in the tough on crime community want to lower that threshold. But what they forget is California has one of the lowest thresholds in the country. There's 33 states across the United States that have higher thresholds for when a theft becomes a felony than California is. In Texas, not known for their criminal justice reform efforts, the threshold is $2,500. So I think it's really misguided for people to blame Prop 47. The reality is, in order for prosecutors to hold people accountable who commit crimes, theft crimes, property crimes, regardless of whether you believe in felonies in prison, in the death penalty, or whether you believe in restorative justice, diversion, and root cause interventions, anywhere in the middle of that spectrum, it starts with police making an arrest. And in San Francisco, property crimes only result in arrests in about 2% of reported crimes.
Chesa, yeah, I want to actually piggyback on that question and talk about the tough on crime rhetoric. We hear a lot about that. Politicians are always tough on crime. And, that certainly is not a California thing. It's national. It goes beyond. So how much do you think that rhetoric impacts your role as district attorney?
It impacts the rhetoric, and the dishonesty around these issues impacts it tremendously. And let me explain why. The work we do in the criminal legal system is complicated work. There's a lot of agencies, right? There's the district attorney and the police and the courts, and there's the probation and parole departments and the Department of Corrections, and there's the sheriffs, right? There's lots and lots of different actors who all play a role in any case, in any criminal justice outcome. And the policies that we need to make our communities safer and to do justice are nuanced. They're complicated. They're at the intersection of the state legislature passing laws and the mayor allocating resources and police responding and citizens feeling safe and strong and comfortable reporting crime and victims being empowered to get the kind of support and healing that they need. The focus on Prop 47 or in this recall is designed to distract from those difficult conversations. But how do we prevent crime? How do we rehabilitate people? How do we heal the trauma that crime causes? Nobody's having those conversations when they attack Prop 47 or when they promote a recall. A recall and these attacks on Prop 47 are really the opposite of the democratic process. And I say that because when you have an election, when you have a process for passing a new law, you bring people together and they put forward their ideas, their platform, their vision, their track record, and they make their case to voters, to their constituents, to their colleagues. They explain why their ideas and vision are better, and they try to win support. Recalls are about who can get the most money, who can attack the most viciously. When you attack Prop 47, when you attack a sitting district attorney like myself, you don't have to say what your vision is. You don't have to put forward your own platform or agenda. You can hide behind paid spokespeople and Republican billionaires doing the financing. And you can promote fear, and you can attack and you can undermine work being done without ever being put to the test of advancing your own agenda, of making your own commitments to voters. That's very destructive for democracy. It generates fear, it promotes distrust, it undermines the hard work of staff in places like my office, and it does it all without advancing the conversations we need to be having about how we can prevent and reduce crime, how we can heal and support victims.
I feel like that's a perfect segue into the next question. You mentioned healing. So let's talk for a second briefly about hate crime. How have you been able to apply restorative justice to hate crimes in San Francisco? Do you think the criticism of you is valid? Much of that criticism seems to be coming from the Asian community. If you could reach Asian citizens in San Francisco, what would you speak directly to them about those issues? What would you say?
There's nothing more important to me than making you safe. My office works all day, every day to promote safety and to support people who've been harmed by crime. I know that some of our residents are living in fear, and we have got to do more work, better, faster, to ensure that everybody is safe and feels safe in their home, in their neighborhood, and in our city. I'm proud of the work we've done to respond to anti-Asian hate and anti-Asian violence. We've seen a really destructive and offensive rise in anti-Asian hate speech and hate crimes. And we know it was driven in large part by former President Trump's racist, xenophobic rhetoric, weaponizing fear and anxiety around the coronavirus to blame China and Chinese immigrants. It was outrageous, it was offensive, it was dishonest, and we are doing our best to push back against that tide. Let me tell you a couple of things we've done. First of all, we've dramatically expanded the number of Chinese-speaking victim advocates in my office. When I started, we had one Chinese-speaking victim advocate, one. Now, San Francisco is a city in the United States, the 48 United States, continental United States, with the largest Chinese community, the largest Chinese-speaking community, the largest Chinatown, and the oldest Chinatown. The fact that on day one, we only had a single Chinese-speaking victim advocate is a disgrace. But we've increased the number by about 500%. And not only that, the head of my victim services division, someone I hired and trained and promoted for that role, is a Chinese speaker, not only Mandarin, but also Cantonese. So we are bringing in staff. My chief assistant district attorney, the person responsible for overseeing all of the litigation in our office under my leadership, is Chinese American. We are putting Chinese Americans in key leadership positions, hiring and recruiting and retaining folks who speak the language and understand the culture of the folks who are being impacted. We've also done more than a dozen trainings with community-based organizations and partners and with the San Francisco Police Department to ensure that folks know what a hate crime is, what the difference between First Amendment protected speech is and a criminal act is, and to make sure that police know how to investigate and gather evidence of hate crimes, because we can't prosecute hate crimes if police don't gather the evidence. And sure enough, after we started doing those trainings, we saw a significant increase in the number of hate crime cases police brought us. In other words, once they knew what to look for, what questions to ask, what evidence to gather, it gave us the evidence we needed to effectively hold people who are committing these crimes accountable.
So let me add to Jeff's question on restorative justice. Have you been able to apply restorative justice to these hate crimes? Has there been interest, in essence, by the victims of hate crimes to participate in some kind of restorative justice process?
You know, it really does depend on a case-by-case basis. For the most part, we have not had victims want to participate in restorative justice in these hate crimes type cases. There is one story I can tell you though, Lisa, and this happened early in the pandemic, actually before the pandemic was really set in February of 2020. I'd only been in office a couple months. And there was a case where a elder Chinese man was gathering recycling to help pay rent. A hard, difficult work, someone really living on the margin, monolingual, non-English speaker. And he was in a mainly Black neighborhood gathering cans. And another recycler, African-American recycler, came up to him and essentially attacked him, assaulted him, and robbed him of his cans. And there were a lot of people watching. And one of them took out a video. And a cell phone and made a video of it. And while he's making the video, he runs up close to where they're fighting over the cans. And the Chinese man is actually crying. It's devastating to watch, horrific. I mean, he's worked tirelessly. This is in order to pay rent, in order to put food on the table, he's going through garbage and collecting cans, and someone has just stolen it from him, and he's heartbroken. And the young person runs up to these two older gentlemen fighting over the cans, and he videos, and in the video, he says something along the lines of that he hates Chinese people. And he's laughing, and he's making fun of the victim. Well, police arrested both the person who committed the robbery and the person who made the video. And we looked at it, and we didn't really believe there was a crime committed. As offensive as the behavior was by the person who made the video, it wasn't clear what crime he made. He never touched him. He didn't participate in the robbery. And we asked the victim how he wanted to proceed. And the victim said to us that he recognized that the young person who made the video, we did this through an interpreter, of course, who spoke his language, but he said, the young person is young and young people make mistakes. And I don't want to go to court and testify against him. I don't want to go through that process against him. I want him to apologize, and I want him to change his behavior. And so we did engage in a restorative process in that case. And that's just one example I could give you. But what we found is that often because of the media pressure and the polarization in San Francisco and beyond of these issues right now, it's been really challenging to get victims to a place where they're open to any kind of support or healing process other than seeking retributive justice. And I think there's a deeply rooted culture in this country that goes back to hanging people by the neck until they're dead in the town square, that ignores the need to heal and tells people that the only form of justice they can expect is vengeance. And I think that's an area where we need to do better so that we can prevent future crimes, so that we can help those who've been harmed by crimes find ways to achieve closure and healing and be able to move forward with their lives. And I think that's something that the system has historically done very, very badly. And we've got a lot of work to do to improve.
Well, I hope that RJI can assist you in that way, because it really is about outreach to victims. They often don't know where to go. So reaching out to them, and sometimes a neutral party is necessary to be able to open doors for healing. But I understand your comments, and that's true, certainly. But Jeff, you have any other comments? And then we'll let Chesa give his closing comments.
Yeah, well, I think my comments are that, look, I think I like all of Chesa's answers here. You know, we've asked some tough questions, the issues that really voters are thinking about. And look, on my end of it, I do sit on the Global Advisory Council of Restorative Justice International. I do advise them on wrongful conviction and other criminal justice reform issues. And, you know, I'm proud to re-endorse you, Chesa, for San Francisco District Attorney.
And exactly, we will do so. We will endorse you again, and we do not support the recall. And so, Chesa, you want to have your closing comments?
Well, first of all, thank you both for your support and for the work you do. And, you know, in closing, I would just say this, you know, the criminal justice system has not been just to many people, to many victims, to many people accused of crimes. And that's been true across the country for decades, for centuries. It took centuries to build up this failed system. And we know the work to fix it is not going to happen overnight. But I am committed to continuing to find effective ways to hold people who cause harm accountable, to continuing to expand resources and services that empower survivors of crime, and to continuing to bring people together from diverse communities and government agencies to do the difficult work of making our communities safe, of holding even those in power accountable when they commit crimes, and of being proactive about preventing crime instead of simply waiting for someone to get harmed and reacting after the fact. That's the challenge we have as a system. It wasn't ever going to happen overnight, certainly not in the midst of a global pandemic. And I look forward to being able to continue to follow through on the promises I made to all of you when I ran for office over the rest of my first term.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us, and good luck on June 7th. We'll be watching closely. And as I said, RJI continues to support you. So this is Lisa Rea with Jeff Deskovic for RJI.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Have a great day. Sorry
Bye-bye.
for the confusion on the front end.
No problem.
No worries.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
day, Chesa. Thank you.